Let's get some analysis now from Francesco Rizzuto, who joins me live from Liverpool in the UK. He's a professor of law at the University of East London. Professor, thank you so much for being with us on the program. Zelensky sounds skeptical on whether or not a trilateral summit will give new results on bringing an end to the war. What are your thoughts on having such a summit? Would they make progress, at least, on sticking points that Selina mentioned there, for example, on territorial disputes and, of course, security guarantees for Ukraine?
Good evening. I don't actually see the prospect of a three-way meeting holding out. I really don't see it happening. Why? Because, as your reporter just pointed out, Putin hasn't budged an iota. And the Ukrainians are not going to give up territory that they haven't lost. So until that's sorted out, I really don't see the point in any meeting. I know this sounds incredibly pessimistic, but the positions really have not changed an iota. I know the Americans are talking this up, but I really don't see any change. I also think the Europeans aren't there. And actually, the Europeans are going to be funding the Ukrainians. So this idea that it can all be stitched up between the Russians and the Americans, with the sort of piggy in the middle Ukrainians having to take whatever the Russians and the Americans agree, it's just not going to work.
But he hasn't ruled out the fact that they may give up territory, signaling that they may hold a referendum on this very issue. How do you see that unfolding?
They may, well, apparently a referendum, a perfectly legal referendum, has already been held in those parts of the Donbass that the Russians already hold. A referendum where, of course, the Ukrainians realize full well they're not going to win back the territory that they've lost. So that's gone. The question is, will they have to give up what they haven't lost in exchange for what the Russians have not gained, or in exchange for what the Russians have gained further along the coast near Zaporizhzhia and so on? So I can't see this happening, given the almost impossible demands that the Russians are actually making. It's not just about territory, by the way. The Russians really want a neutral, pliant Ukraine. They don't want a Finland. They want much, much more than that. And we have to be clear about what the Russians want. We must believe what Putin says to us and not take our own delusions or the haste that the Americans have in stitching up some kind of peace agreement so that eventually Trump can win a peace prize or something. Mm-hmm. It's much more serious than that.
Well, following the discussions today, Zelensky said that the U.S. needs to put more pressure on Russia, saying that the U.S. would be the only country to bring an end to this war. How much leverage does Trump have at this point? How much more pressure can be put on Russia?
I don't think the Americans are going to put any pressure on Russia. We've seen month after month utterances from Trump about sanctions and so on, but the reality is that the Americans have really given up on the Ukrainians. The Europeans are having to buy weapons from the Americans in order to give the Ukrainians. Okay, the Americans are still helping a little bit, but what pressure? Really, the Americans are not willing to do that. They're even playing hardball over security guarantees, for goodness sake. And the Europeans are in no fit state to replace the Americans in terms of military hardware. They've still got 2 or 3 years to go on that account, given that the populations in many European states are not particularly keen on going to war. So we're really deadlocked, as far as I can see, unless people are hiding information, Zelensky, for example, that they're going to cede, and that actually Putin has just been stringing us along, and in the end he's going to accept that the Ukraine will be in the European Union, that we can have European troops in the Ukraine. I mean, this is fantasy land. Nothing has changed, in my view.
Professor Francesco Rizzuto, thank you so much for being with us here on TRT World and sharing that analysis with us.
Pleasure. Good night.